Today I want to do something different. I want to explore the events leading up to Alexandros Mograine's death at the hands of his eldest son, Renault. Throughout the Ashbringer comic, we see Alexandros show his favoritism for Darion, in very obvious ways to much more subtle ways, and I believe that had he been a better father to Renault, like he was to Darion, then he would have survived. Before we begin though, I want to establish one important point. This isn't simply my interpretation or me grasping at straws saying that Darion was his favorite. Alexandros himself openly admits that he favored Darion during a conversation with Talon Fordring, saying, "You think I show favoritism? I'll favor you with a story, Talon. The night Darion was born, he was born still. He made no movement, he made no sound. In a panic, I rushed out to the stream that courses near our home. I plunged Darion into the icy waters, and to my astonishment, to my delight, he began flailing. And then he cried out, the most exquisite sound I have ever. I ran back into the house to inform Elena that our son had survived, only to find out that she had not. When I look into Darion's eyes, I see my wife. Losing him would be like losing her all over again. And that is a thought I cannot bear. As long as Darion lives, a part of Elena lives as well. Perhaps it is unfair of me, but that is how I feel." Despite loving both of his sons, he unknowingly drove a wedge between himself and Renault. First, I want to go through the story within the comic up to Alexandros' death, and then go back and highlight sections that I found interesting. The story starts with the end of the Second War, where Alexandros encounters an orc warlock wielding a black orb that destroys anyone who comes into contact with its magic when it's wielded. When the warlock is killed and drops the orb, Alexandros believes that in the right hands it could do good. But when he touches it, the energy within wrecks his right arm, and no healing magic can help. Following the war, we come to the Mograine household, where his sons, Renault and Darion, find the black orb. They are both enamored with it and begin daring each other to touch it. But Alexandros gets to them before either of them can repeat his mistake from the past. His anger shows toward Renault, as he says that he's disappointed in him most of all, since he should be a better role model for Darion. After storing the orb away from the boys, Alexandros heads outside to talk to Elena's gravestone, saying that Renault is so much like himself while Darion is much more like her. His friend Fairbanks comes up to talk to Alexandros, to which Alexandros says that he needs to have a chat about something that has been on his mind for some time. A meeting is then set for South Shore in the coming days. At the meeting, Alexandros meets with Fairbanks, Isilian, Doan, and General Bendis to discuss his idea of the black orb being used for good. Isilian thinks this is absurd and believes it can only be used for evil and never for righteousness. He casts a lightning spell in an attempt to destroy it, but instead, the orb absorbs the magic and begins glowing with light energy. This gives Doan the idea to perform an experiment, to have all of them focus their magic into the orb. Their combined power transforms it into a glowing sphere of light, which completely heals Alexandros' long damaged arm. After the meeting, their leader, Saidan Dothrahan, informs them of the culling of Stratholme and Prince Arthas' order for the paladins to stand down. However, Saidan tells Alexandros to do what he thinks is needed, and so Alexandros goes to Ironforge, where their king, Magni Bronzebeard, can forge them a weapon. As Alexandros says, "When it comes to masonry and engineering, none are better at delving into the bowels of the earth and shaping it to their purpose than the dwarves." After arriving in Ironforge, Magni begins the forging process, and after a grueling effort, he presents the sword to Alexandros and informs him of the situation in Lordaeron, with the undead converging. Alexandros and Fairbanks rush back home to Renault and Darion, where they find a message carved into the dinner table that reads, "Hearthglen." As they leave the house, undead appear, and Alexandros quickly dispatches them, turning them to ash. This gives Alexandros a name for the sword, the Ashbringer. Finally reaching Hearthglen, Alexandros finds the boys safe and unharmed. The remaining knights then go out to try to reduce the undead numbers, eventually arriving at the city of Stratholme. They venture inside its walls, where fires don't seem to extinguish, and the past still walks around in the shadows. Alexandros gives Darion an out, but Darion is set on staying. Alexandros understands and tells Renault that he needs to watch Darion, to which Renault replies, "Yes, father." Quickly though, all hell breaks loose, and they become separated from each other. Saidan and Alexandros get cut off from the others, but then Saidan is pushed back into a building away from Alexandros. He hopes to catch his breath before getting back out to help his people, but he won't make it out alive. The Dreadlord Balnaazzar kills him and assumes his form. Alexandros does eventually get back to the others, but not before Darion is struck by a shadow bolt. Renault tries to get to Darion in time to block the attack, but he can't reach him quickly enough. Although he does manage to kill the undead caster before tending to Darion. After a tense few minutes, they escape from Stratholme with everyone who went in except Satan, though the others don't know what happened to him. They find an area and set up camp for the night, where they lay Darion in a tent while Asilian and Alexandros stay by his side. Alexandros lets his anger get the better of him as Renault sits by the fire, clearly feeling terrible about everything that happened. To Renault's and everyone else's shock, Alexandros comes out in a rage, grabs Renault by the collar and yells at him, asking how he could let this happen. Brigida Bendis says that it's a miracle any of them got out alive, but Alexandros isn't hearing it until Satan, now Balnaazzar, steps in and pulls Renault away from him, agreeing with Bridget. Alexandros sits by the fire with Talon, who points out that Renault was in danger as well. Alexandros then tells the story of Darion's birth and explains that whenever he looks into Darion's eyes, he sees Elena. And as long as Darion survives, a part of her does as well. The night comes to an end, and as the sun rises over the land, Darion steps out of the tent. Alexandros runs to him and embraces him. Back at Hearthglen, Balnaazzar communicates with his brother Varimothras about the Mograines and how Alexandros is too strong to be left alive. His youngest son is like his father, displaying Alexandros' conviction. But Balnaazzar notes that his oldest son has a darker turn of soul, and Varimothras tells Balnaazzar that Alexandros must die. Sometime later, Renault is ill in bed and being tended to by Satan, who is stoking the flames of Renault's resentment. While Renault is being tended to, Alexandros, along with Maxwell Tyrosus, Fairbanks, and Brigida Bendis, goes to investigate the undead moving into the former capital city of Lordaeron. They eventually make their way to the Scarlet Monastery, where they discover a troll named Zabra, who has discovered the light. While Bridget wants to kill him, Tyrosus stays her hand, and Alexandros places his hand on Zabra's head, judging him, realizing that he has truly been touched by the light. With Zabra telling the truth, Alexandros allows him to leave unharmed. Back at the base with Darion and Renault, Darion tries to go see his older brother, but Satan says that Renault is still under the weather. Darion then heads to Tyr's hand, but asks Satan to extend his wishes for a speedy recovery to his brother. Then Satan goes and talks with Renault, telling him that the time is now or never and that he has to embrace his future. Renault struggles as he wrestles with this, but we then go to Alexandros, where Renault rushes to his father and tells him that Darion was taken by the Scourge to Stratholme. This causes Alexandros and Fairbanks to rush off to try to save Darion. As they leave, Renault turns and watches them, saying, "Yes, you ride to the ends of the earth for your precious Darion. Tell me, father, would you have done as much for me?" Alexandros and Fairbanks finally arrive at Stratholme, only to learn that it's a trap. They become surrounded by an army of the Scourge, but Alexandros won't go down without a hell of a fight. During the battle, Fairbanks vanishes amidst a wave of undead, and after a grueling fight, Alexandros calls down a massive surge of holy power and ends the threat. He's left exhausted and on his knees, catching his breath when, suddenly, the Ashbringer is thrust through his back. He turns to see Renault with tears in his eyes. As Alexandros falls to the ground, he says that he was wrong and that Renault is nothing like him. To which Renault yells out, "I don't want to be you. I'll be greater than you ever were. Now I can become the man you never thought I would be." And with that, it is the end of the Ashbringer as the people knew him. Now that we know how Alexandros died, I want to rewind to certain events and discuss them a bit more, and more than likely overanalyze them. First up is the Orb Incident, where the boys find the orb that wrecked Alexandros' arm. When I first read through this, I didn't think much of it other than the fact that Alexandros was much angrier at Renault than Darion. He kind of explains it by saying that Renault should be a better role model for Darion, which is understandable, since he is the older brother. But one other thing that caught my eye, Renault is the only one to say "ow" out loud. That normally may not raise any eyebrows, since I think we've all accidentally grabbed someone a bit harder than we intended, especially when trying to stop them from doing something stupid like they were about to. But normally, you would apologize and move on, but knowing about the favoritism, I feel like it was a factor here. Whether Alexandros intentionally grabbed Renault harder, I can't say for sure. Maybe he wasn't even fully aware of his favoritism yet and wouldn't realize it until years later. Personally though, I definitely think that the bias towards Darion is already present in his mind, and he's more upset that Renault could have injured the son he feels carries Elena's spirit. Really though, Elena is in both of them. I have no doubt that she wouldn't care for the favoritism, as any good parent wouldn't want that. Or at least I don't think a parent would want their spouse clearly favoring one child over another. Regardless, the boys most likely would have died, and part of me leans more toward Alexandros grabbing Renault harder on purpose. There is only one panel, so there isn't much to go off of, but knowing his feelings about each boy, I'm inclined to lean in that direction. I think that if Alexandros had apologized to Renault for grabbing him as hard as he did, and really sat both boys down to explain the dangers the orb possessed, it would have been a better way to handle it. It possibly could have prevented some resentment from forming, while also helping them understand that Alexandros had overreacted because of just how dangerous the orb was, and they shouldn't mess with it at all. But on the flip side, he probably shouldn't have something that dangerous in a house with kids. Alright, now we move on to the meeting where Alexandros explains what he wants to do with the orb. Partway through the meeting, we see that Renault and Darion have snuck in to spy on them. This one is kind of tough because we see that the meeting itself is at the South Shore Inn, suggesting that it isn't a top secret meeting or anything like that. At the same time, I can't tell if in the comic they're in a back room or somewhere else for privacy, but either way, if it was some super top secret thing, they would probably hold it at their base, instead of at a random inn, is my guess at least. I feel like Renault could have sat in on it because, as someone who most likely would like to take over for his dad at some point, learning how Alexandros carries himself in a meeting would do him some good. Even if Alexandros left Renault at home with Darion because he felt that Darion was too young to be involved, which I understand, I think Alexandros should have told Renault that he would fill him in on it later. To me, it feels like another instance where Alexandros doesn't see Renault as much more than a bodyguard for Darion. I think that had Alexandros communicated with Renault more, or simply told him that he would explain everything to him later, Renault may have respected the decision more. He might have still snuck out because teens can be rebellious, but at the end of the day, I just think communicating with him would have been a better move. But there was something else that Renault said that had me thinking that Alexandros didn't tell him anything more than stay and watch Darion. In the scene itself, we see Renault get frustrated and say he doesn't understand why he couldn't sit in on the meeting. Why doesn't anyone trust him, or why does anyone respect his opinion? To me, it's that resentment slowly building up within Renault. While there isn't much in this scene, I think the next couple scenes show more of Alexandros' feelings. We move on to the part where the group is entering Stratholme, and Alexandros gives Darion an out. Alexandros tells Darion that he can leave if he wanted to, but Darion says he wanted to stay, which his father is okay with. But what stuck out to me was that Alexandros didn't say something like, "Be sure you both watch each other's backs." Instead, he only tells Renault to watch out for Darion. With Alexandros being the High Lord of his order and knowing the threats they may face in the future, and currently, I have to imagine the boys were trained by other paladins, or Alexandros himself, from a young age to ensure they were as ready as they could be for whatever the world might throw at them. The other possibility is that he really only trained Renault and let Darion do much less training. If that's the case though, I wouldn't be bringing my young son on a mission like this. It just wouldn't make sense. For me, it would only make sense for the boys to even be there if they had been trained a lot growing up. If it were me, I would raise the boys with the mentality of watch each other's backs. Not only do I think their bond would be better because of it, but in cases like this, it would be instinctual for them to watch out for each other, and not just have Renault be the one focusing on Darion. This leads into when all hell breaks loose and Darion gets injured. Now during the group's attempt to escape, Darion is hit by a shadow bolt from an undead caster. Renault was fighting some enemies when he tried to warn Darion. In the panel, it seems like he tried to get to his side to either take the hit for him or move him out of the way, but he was too slow. However, he did get the kill on the caster, and now Renault is tending to Darion while fighting off attackers and ensuring that his little brother isn't attacked again. On their way out of the overrun city, while they're being chased, Alexandros asks about Darion as he sees him being carried by a Bendis. But the fact that he doesn't even ask about Renault at all is just not right to me. He's thinking about Darion and Renault seemingly isn't even on his mind. Through all of that, why would he not ask about both boys? Okay, so I can kind of give him a little leeway here since they are being chased out by the undead and such, but in the comic, I can't tell if he actually sees Renault. He sees Darion as he's being carried by a Bendis, but either way, why would you not ask if he's okay too? Why would you not ask, are the boys okay? It didn't really matter since they didn't have time to answer his question regardless, but he doesn't even try. And it just rubbed me the wrong way. but I get life or death situation, so I'll give a slight pass on this one. However, the next instance, I definitely can't give a pass to. When they get to the location where they want to set up camp for the night, this is where his favoritism takes over and his anger boils over. When Issylien tells Alexandros that it is only Darion's faith that can get him through this, as their healing has no effect, we see Alexandros leave the tent. Renault is sitting by the fire with his head in his hands, clearly distraught by all this. As an older brother myself, I can say that I'd be harder on myself than anyone else could ever be. Even if it was impossible for me to protect my younger sibling, and I knew I'd done everything I could in that moment, I'd still feel like a failure. I wouldn't need anyone kicking me further while I'm already down. And Alexandros not only kicks Renault while he's down, he throws salt in the wound tenfold. His anger boils over toward Renault as he grabs him by the collar, yelling at him, asking how he could let this happen, reminding him that he was supposed to protect Darion, as if Renault didn't already know that. Even when Brigida Bendis speaks up, saying that it was a miracle any of them made it out alive, which is true, Alexandros doesn't listen. Then Satan, now Balnaazzar, steps in and physically pulls Renault away from his father. And Alexandros still doesn't apologize or say anything to Renault. That's just bonkers to me. It is a terrible situation with Darion, but Alexandros just made it so much worse. Had he possibly stopped and thought for a few seconds, he could have talked to Renault about it. He should know that Renault tried his best, and in all that chaos, someone getting injured was basically a guarantee. There were plenty of options here to not make the situation worse, but Alexandros picked all the wrong dialogue options. Following this interaction was Alexandros relays the story of Darion's birth, but even being reminded again by Talon that Renault was also in danger isn't enough for Alexandros to admit that he went too far and to apologize. Then the next morning, when Darion wakes up, the panel shows Alexandros running to him and embracing him, as is expected. However, we see Renault standing in the background. His head is tilted down and his shoulders appear to be slumped. He's not excited to see his brother recovered, and I feel this is where his resentment toward Alexandros grows much more. He's angry at his father, but also probably resenting Darion for being the favorite, especially when it seems so obvious that to Alexandros, he's nothing more than a protector for Darion and probably feels expendable to his father. If my younger sibling was waking up from some sort of injury, I definitely would run to hug them. Unless they aren't a hugger, then we'd fist bump or something, but I would definitely be there, not standing on the sidelines. But I think after the previous night's events, and then just now hearing his father say, "It is over now. Now you are safe. I love you, son. With all that I am, all I was, all I ever will be," doesn't help. Renault may think that he will never hear those words from his own father, and it just twists the knife even further. This idea is further amplified when the final scene of the issue has Balnaazzar communicating with his brother Varimathras about the Mograines, and he specifically says that the older child has a darker turn of soul. Had Alexandros gotten out of his own way and opened his eyes to how Renault feels, I could see him surviving. But we still have a couple more instances I want to highlight. Here are two parts that start showing Renault's frustration with his dad in his own words. He seems to come down with some sort of illness. Now, I don't want to say there's no way Balnaazzar drugged him or possibly put something in his drink, but I feel like if the Dreadlords were going to go that route of simply drugging someone, or mind controlling, they wouldn't specifically mention his darker turn of soul as Balnaazzar stated. I feel like if they were going to do some sort of drugging, it would be stated or there would be some extra text somewhere to indicate it. On top of that, we see in Balnaazzar's interaction with Renault that he keeps supporting the idea that his father doesn't see him as anything more than a follower, saying, "You're a natural leader, Renault. A man like you should be in a position of influence, of power. I've told Alexandros this, and what was the High Lord's reply? That you're a loyal soldier, and that's all. A soldier, Renault, a follower. That's how he sees you." And this is when Renault says that he has proven himself over and over, but he remains a ghost while Darion is showered with affection. The chasm between father and son is growing by the minute, and Balnaazzar is going to ensure it isn't something that can be overcome. Then we jump ahead a little bit, and in this scene coming up is one that I feel hints towards possible drugging, but I'm still on the fence about that. I'm still leaning more towards just good old manipulation. And this is where Darion tries to check in on Renault, but he's turned away by the Lord Commander. Darion asks him to extend his wishes for a speedy recovery to Renault, and Balnaazzar agrees and then goes 10 to Renault, who at this point is struggling hard with what decision he will make. So first off, Balnaazzar specifically says you should have some more tea, implying to me that there may be something in the tea making Renault more malleable. But it's the final panel that has me really curious. We see Renault sitting in bed with his hands on his head, seemingly in pain, much like he appeared in one of the earlier panels. Then we see a darkness coming down and beginning to engulf him. I'm not sure if this is more symbolic of Renault giving into the darkness through Balnaazzar's manipulation, or some sort of drug or magic effect finally working its magic. I personally lean towards the darkness being more symbolic of the manipulation taking over rather than a drug taking effect, or some sort of mind control. In a world like Azeroth, I feel like there would be some way for dreadlords to take control of someone or manipulate them to their will. We even know that priests have a spell for mind control in-game. So whether that's canon in the lore of the priests, I'm not 100% sure, but it isn't hard for me to think there's something like that for casters in the comic to do, especially dreadlords, demons. So it's hard for me to believe that the dreadlords wouldn't have something they could use to simply mind control someone into killing Alexandros. Instead, they chose to manipulate Renault. They chose him because Balnaazzar sensed his growing resentment, knew it could be used against Alexandros, and knew they could weaponize it. While Renault knows what he's doing is wrong, he's also sick of his father's treatment. He tries to fight back against that feeling, but in the end, his anger and resentment boil over and he goes along with Balnaazzar's plan. Balnaazzar then says, "I have made contact with our enemies. We have arrived at a mutually beneficial arrangement, but the window of opportunity is narrow and will soon draw to a close. If you are to embrace your future, if you are to prove your worth, prove your father and all the others wrong, then the time to act is now." With that, I feel like he's doing multiple things. He's adding extra pressure by telling Renault that this needs to be done now, and that he needs to make this decision. And at the same time, he's reinforcing Renault's fear and deepest sadness that others will see him as weak or as less than what he believes he should be. Balnaazzar is capitalizing on all of that in this moment and finally pushing Renault over the edge to commit the final act that can't be taken back. And we have arrived at Alexandros' end as a man among the living, and Renault's final deception to his father. Renault rushes to his father in Fairbanks, telling them of Darion's quote-unquote abduction. As they rush off to save Darion, Renault can't help but say out loud, "Would you have done as much for me?" I can say that I believe Alexandros would rush to save Renault, but I don't think he would have the same fire as he does going to save Darion. Either way, Alexandros fights like mad to survive. When he has successfully won against the small army of Scourge, he collapses to his knees, exhausted and resting before he can search for Fairbanks, who was taken away by a flood of enemies. Before Alexandros can get up, however, the Ashbringer is thrust through his chest and he turns to see Renault with tears flowing down his face. This is where, before Alexandros dies, he says, "I was wrong about you, boy. You're nothing like me." Renault lets out the remainder of his anger and frustration, yelling at him that he doesn't want to be him. Now he can become the man his father never thought he would be. I don't think Alexandros realized how much he was hurting Renault. He only tells Renault once that he loves him in the entire comic that I could find, and that's in a hallucination or a dream of some sort while he's being turned into a Death Knight. He knew he showed favoritism, but for some reason he never seemed to think about how much he was messing with Renault's head. With all of that said, we come full circle back to the event that started it all, Elena's death. The moment that shaped Alexandros greatly into the man and father he would become. While I can understand that some kids are more like one parent than another, at the end of the day, any parent's wish should be that their kids are happy and healthy. Even if Darion was more like Elena and Renault was more like Alexandros, her spirit, heart, and soul were still part of both boys. Her spirit, heart, and soul were still a part of both boys. Had Alexandros realized that, I believe things could have been very different. As for Renault, I think he eventually regretted what he did. In that moment with Alexandros outside Stratholme, Renault may have felt some sort of catharsis from finally releasing all of that anger he had built up towards his father, and also finally feeling like he got recognition because he would go on to be the leader of the Scarlet Crusade for a while. But it definitely didn't last, which was very evident when Darion comes back with the corrupted Ashbringer to visit Renault, and Renault goes nuts seeing the sword in Darion, actually beating on Darion and kicking Darion repeatedly, and that eventually leads to Renault being decapitated by his ghostly father. Eventually, the reality of what he had done and the guilt that came with it definitely came in, along with the realization that there had been other options. Now, without the Dreadlord's involvement, I don't think this ends in murder. I could see Renault eventually doing something stupid or drastic to prove himself to his father to try to get some sort of recognition or just, a kudos. Maybe their relationship eventually comes to blows or Renault rebels in some way in an attempt to finally earn the affection and approval he's been searching for. Exactly what happens is impossible to know, but I do think their relationship was heading towards some sort of breaking point if nothing changed. Balnaazzar took that resentment and weaponized it. He offered Renault the recognition, respect, and opportunity he felt his father had denied him, and ultimately used those feelings to turn Renault against Alexandros. And at the end of the day, that's why I still think Alexandros' death could have been avoided. He didn't need to love Darion any less. He needed to recognize what his favoritism was doing to Renault, and make sure that his oldest son knew that he was more than Darion's protector. He was his son too. So before we wrap up the video, there is a couple things I wanted to mention and talk about. The main one was that apparently Renault was corrupted by Balnaazzar's blood, which makes sense to my suspicion of why he was suggesting, hey, drink more tea, buddy, you can do it. The scene that Balnaazzar is talking to Varimathras is when he's getting the blood ready for Renault. I believe that would make the most sense. Genuinely though, that is just how I thought he had to talk to Varimathras, and it didn't even cross my mind that that was what he was using to push Renault over the edge. But I am still curious if they only picked him due to his growing anger toward Alexandros, or if they just figured that, well, we can ruin an entire family. That seems like a good time. It's a possibility, I think. But him having the anger towards Alexandros, I would guess made him more malleable and just easier to manipulate. So while the blood kind of pushed him over the edge, similar to Grommash Hellscream with Manoros blood, his resentment towards his father and the constant prodding of Balnaazzar saying that you deserve better, that you can do better, that you can prove everyone wrong, just pushed him to that extra bit. And when he stabs his father, you can see the tears in his eyes. And I think it's that realization of what he just did, for starters, but it just all comes crashing down. And while he didn't want to kill him, he also has that catharsis, like I had mentioned before, so it's interesting to me. But with all that said, hopefully you enjoyed. This video took me very much out of my comfort zone, and I certainly hope it came out well and it made sense. I am glad I gave it a try, but I'm very happy that it's done, until I try another video that's out of my comfort zone. Let me know if you have any theories about what if stuff, if there's another theory about with Alexandros that maybe I didn't think of. There's a handful that I have thought of, but this is the main one that popped in my head when I was reading the comic. So either way, that's going to do it for this one. Hopefully you did enjoy. Please, do take care of yourself. You're doing great. Hopefully I'll see you in the next one. After the meeting, Satan informs him of the calling of Stratholme and Prince Arthas' order of... After the meeting, their leader, Satan Dothrhan, informs them of the calling... He hopes to catch his breath before getting back out. God damn it. Okay, so I can give him kind of a little bit of a leeway. Genuinely,